Okay, well, we're starting off with Ring of Honor because it was a pretty ominous day with ROH putting out this message, and we'll start there. Throughout the pandemic, our top priority was to keep everyone healthy and safe, and despite not producing any live events over 18 months, we were able to keep everyone fully contracted. We now find ourselves at a time when we need to make changes to our business operations and are planning to pivot for Ring of Honor with a new mission and strategy. The year will culminate with Final Battle in December, and we will be taking the first quarter of 2022 to work internally to reimagine ROH. ROH has the most dedicated fans in the industry, and we appreciate their loyalty and patience as we reconceptualize ROH. We anticipate returning to live events in April for the Super Card of Honor with a new fan-focused product and provide a unique experience for wrestling fans. So what you can take from that is that they do have TV tapings coming up this weekend, and they have Final Battle December the 11th. And after that, they are going to go on a hiatus for what they are stating the first quarter of 2022, where they anticipate returning to live events for WrestleMania weekend with Super Card of Honor, which is always one of, if not their biggest card of the year. Now, after this, some additional reporting came out from Dave Meltzer and Sean Ross Sapp at Fightful, reporting that ROH talent will be released from their contracts, or their contracts will not be renewed at the end of the year. And those that have deals going beyond 2021 will be paid through March 31st. Additionally, Fightful is reporting that Joe Koff, the COO of the company, told talent that this was a Sinclair call and that talent has been told to contact Ring of Honor official Greg Gilliland if they want to work in other places. If they're under contract, they will work to make that possible. PWInsider.com adding that they have the TVs this weekend in Baltimore, and they do have a venue locked in for Dallas over WrestleMania weekend, and that ROH television will continue during this hiatus, although it will include some archived footage. You can see the response, a ton of ROH performers getting online quickly, posting their messages and making themselves available for independent bookings. No one was faster than ROH champion Bandito, who within hours was booked by Game Changer for cards on December 3rd and 4th in Texas and December 17th in LA. So that is a lot way. I think at the very least, you're looking at Ring of Honor. This seems to be the end of like contracted talent for ROH, and the question becomes, what can you reimagine when you don't know what ROH is even going to consist of by April? There is even the most loyal of performers here are not going to be sticking around, you would think, to see what happens at the end of this. This does not paint a bright picture for ROH's future. And what pieces are you even going to be having? Like, I think the best case is ROH existing where it would just be paying guys per appearance and being very much show to show, like nothing resembling the ROH that had been in existence up until today.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's pretty safe to say, like, the way that I think they've been operating the ROH, at least in its current incarnation, feels like it's very much finished, or at least after these next set of tapings after Final Battle. I mean, I think in discussing wrestling promotions throughout the pandemic, first of all, like they have been championed, Sinclair and Ring of Honor, for being the ones who have handled it perhaps the best, or have at least been the most cautious.
And took care of their employees, their talent. I mean, that they deserve great. They should be commended for how they took care of everybody during the pandemic when, I mean, they could have argued, we're not running shows, there's no revenue coming in, tough luck. And they paid their talent, and that should be applauded. And unfortunately, they're now in this situation where it's, I mean, this clearly is a fork in the road in terms of Sinclair and what are we doing in this pro wrestling business.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it wasn't too much of a shock to hear that they weren't doing well financially, or maybe the business wasn't really running up to the standard that Sinclair really wanted. But I don't know if anybody would have imagined this type of news so suddenly, and all of the talent probably, getting their chance to leave the company, it turns out. And It's really unfortunate, of course, for all the people that are there. It also makes you really wonder what capacity Sinclair wants to continue operating ROH as. I imagine it'll be greatly slimmed down. I mean, they have an all-time great wrestling videotape library at their disposal that maybe they will use to fill up their broadcasts and perhaps do similar ratings to what they're doing right now. I'm not entirely sure, but running a wrestling promotion is not a cheap thing to do, especially a full-time one at that. And
a live event business post-pandemic. I mean, they have not raced back. Like, they've done, their pay-per-view in front of fans, but I mean, they have not rushed back and done TV in front of fans. Like, they have not been racing back to a live event operation. And maybe they're just looking at that as, this. I think that you can probably trace a lot of this back to, with ROH, I look at two major factors. One being that this company had a dramatic change at the end of 2018 when the Elite left, when that whole group left. I mean, that was ROH at its peak of popularity of this generation, where they had grown to unbelievable heights by their standards in the in the independent wrestling scene, if you want to classify them as such. They're really not, with a Sinclair parent company. But at that point, it was, what company are we? Are we going to be out there, and are we going to aggressively fight to be a third promotion with WWE and AEW? We have seen over time that ROH, it became fighting for the remaining pieces of the pie that's out there. It's like, we're looking at a North American wrestling industry that is going to be dominated by one monster, and a second that has proven to be, a rising competitor in the field that is still leagues away from WWE in terms of size and financial power behind it. But we're also seeing, like, there are going to be companies that it's a distant amount of space between them, and that the industry is going to have casualties by all of this. And ROH, it's a great what if question of, in 2018, like, ROH had the contractual right to tell the Bucks and Cody, you guys all in, great idea, no chance. Like, we have your US rights. And they said yes, and they let them go ahead with that, and they helped them out with the show. I don't know if things are any different if they say no to them, but they said yes. And it's proven as a greater whole to, I think, help the industry as a whole. But this is also the flip side, that ROH, they were never the same after 2018. They have brought in some tremendous talent, but like, you have all of these companies that are all fighting for fans' attention and dollars. And it's one thing to say, I'm following this product every week, I'm watching their TV, but are you spending money on this product? Like, there's only so much to go around. If you're the wrestling fan, you have a lot of options, and a lot of it is going to be concentrated in the big two companies.
Yeah, and if we're ranking companies right now, I mean, I don't even know if ROH would be number 3. I don't even know if they would be number 4. I hear far more about Impact and GCW these days than I do Ring of Honor, maybe even the NWA from time to time. And everything you mentioned, of course, are the major factors involved. I mean, they were just coming off of selling out Madison Square Garden, dude. Like, to go from that all the way to several years later, essentially what feels like the end of the company.
Even the year prior, when we were at that show in New Orleans, where they built it off the Kenny Omega Cody program, like, that was a giant show to be at. And then even more so the next year, like, that relationship with New Japan, a lot of people were critical of just how much, New Japan talent, how they were booked, but it was a very positive business relationship when they came here to Toronto, when they would go to New York. I mean, that 2017, 2018 period was very strong for the company.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, much of the reason for all that success for those shows was down to New Japan Pro Wrestling and down to what is now the core of All Elite Wrestling. But Ring of Honor still very much had a hand in being able to control a lot of that and to potentially grow and expand those relationships. And for whatever reason they mismanaged perhaps a lot of those aspects. of their business. And since the Elite formed, I mean, of course, there's a pandemic that we have to talk about, but
the pandemic that was the other, like, the major thing. It's like you look at the talent that left in 18, the pandemic as well is like, those are the big two that I think are the factors we look at here of ROH, like how we.
But even without the pandemic, you know, I can't necessarily say that anything that Ring of Honor was doing, any moves that they were making were such exciting moves that I think were able to dominate the conversation in the wrestling space. Again, even pandemic aside, prior to the pandemic, it's like I feel like ultimately it might be like a deeper core philosophy issue with the company that needs to certainly be reevaluated. And what is that reevaluation going to look like? They certainly seem to indicate that they have plans of returning, but what can they do is what I'm curious. My suspicion is that
with what? I mean, you can book a one-off WrestleMania weekend show, and there will be independent talent out there that you can sign for a one-off card, but that's a one-off. And what are we looking at long-term for ROH? I think that's very much in question. And, you know, talent has to also be of the understanding that, my God, we're coming off all these WWE cuts that we're still fresh off of with this year's cuts. You're now looking at another pool. Like, AEW can't sign everybody.
Yeah.
It's to the benefit of the industry that we have another thriving company out there that can really utilize some of this talent. So this is not something where you look at this, it's going to be unfortunate for some talent. I will say this to ROH. It's not like they're dicking these people around or just, you know, providing lip service. Hey, we're going to go on a small break, but it's like they're stating, hey, it's a hiatus, but if you want out of your deals, we'll let you take bookings. You're going to be if you have a contract beyond this year, you're at least paid up until this point. If it's a long-term contract, I can see you being upset that suddenly you're banking on X amount of years and now it's the end of March. But nonetheless, I think they're going to try and make this as easy for talent to get out there immediately, and are not going to be any kind of impediment to them finding work immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, as far as like its return, I'm certainly curious what happens. There's a great number of free agents right now in the wrestling world. And I think from all that amount of talent, I feel like something has to happen. Something else will form that AEW can't necessarily just fulfill themselves. So in a year's time, I'm very curious to see like what this big crop of talent that's existing out there right now, and will probably grow in the next few months, what's going to happen to the independent scene at large, and maybe even the rise of another competitor. I mean, Sinclair is not out of the wrestling business.
The fact that they are going to continue running television, I mean, there is some value to them of filling these syndicated networks with an hour of, in the grand scheme, relatively cheap programming, especially if you're going to the archive where you're just talking about, you know, production costs in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like there's still some potential there. I mean, of course, as a name brand, even though it's not the hottest brand in the world right now, Ring of Honor, I think, still carries a good deal of recognition attached to it. And there's definitely some value there. I mean, a lot of people are maybe discussing online about potential sale. Do you see that being a possibility?
I mean, just like what are you buying? I mean, to me, it's if
the library.
Well, that's a separate thing. Like, to me, the idea of the library, that's enticing, but also to who? Like, WWE now has a fixed deal with Peacock. I don't think they're going to be in the market for buying tape libraries. Like, for what value? You are being paid for the next 5 years. Adding a library, like, there's no need for that. Unless, you know, you just feel for long term, it's having a catalog of matches. But I mean, the library is, of course, of note, where if you're an AEW and you want to eventually launch a service and you want to be able to tell at least the early portion of the CM Punk story, the Bryan Danielson story, I mean, that's a great library to have. That's the big value. But in terms of like an actual like company sale, it's, to me, if you're a promoter out there, you're just going to pick the pieces of the contracts that become available and go after those free agent talents, stock up your rosters. I mean, the value of ROH is like that syndicated network, which I mean, what is Sinclair's relationship with pro wrestling now? It's like in 2011, they came and saved ROH, which was, someone who deserves a lot of credit is Kerry Silkin, who ROH would not have made it to 2011 without Kerry Silkin just writing off losses essentially to keep that company running. But Sinclair buys it, and it's financial stability, but you're also not the top property in the Sinclair portfolio. And they kept it running for all of this time. And we saw what the level of commitment was. It's not like ROH was, just reaping the benefits of being inside of a corporation like Sinclair Broadcasting. They, their production was nice. They had a fine looking program, but it was not state of the art. And at this point, if you are Sinclair and suddenly you wake up and you're just looking at what value is our being in the pro wrestling business bringing to our portfolio, and is the juice worth the squeeze at this point? And sometimes with large companies, they wake up one day, it's like you may be all in until you're not, and that can flip on a dime.
Yes.
We lived through that. Like one day you're all in on this kind of vision for a company, the next you're not. And that is how these businesses operate.
Yeah. I don't know if this is the end of Ring of Honor, but it's certainly the end of this current incarnation of it. And that story. How would you handle Final Battle? Because in many ways, that the fan base is going to treat this almost as a farewell show, even though it may not be. The talent will, for sure, and I think the audience will, absolutely.
And that goes into how do you execute this show? Is it just we're going to run a show with the idea that we're coming back after, or do you treat this as like it's bye for now, or like that's going to be a show that will have interest because of this? Are we going to see a show in April? That is going to be the question until there's a concrete announcement of Supercard of Honor in April.
It's very tricky because I think on the one hand, you want to provide that, sentimental, satisfying, perhaps goodbye for the roster, for the audience. This is a case where it's not just, a show being kind of canceled from out of nowhere. They're giving them warning. Hey, this is sort of like the date where we're going to go on hiatus. At the same time, I don't think you want to give the impression to the audience that you're done if you do want to bring this thing back by April. So I think it'll have to be a combination of, there's no doubt that much of this roster probably won't be returning in April. So I think you have to do satisfying goodbyes for them while at the same time giving your audience something to look forward to, a trickle of hope, for what is to come in April. It's going to be tricky, but I think it'll be a show with a lot of attention.
Yeah, certainly. I think so. And I think you will see a lot of goodwill among this roster because of the experience throughout this pandemic. Yeah. I would say, I think you're going to see a lot of positive comments from those that worked in ROH. Maybe not every person, but I would say most that went through this period and how they were taken care of. I think you'll see a lot of positivity in that sense.
Yeah, and that goes a long way. It's not a big industry, and there are only so many places to work in. So, I've heard nothing but good things about that management.
Anyway, so we will obviously continue to focus on this story, but it's one that it has a lot of questions attached to it, but it also, being a realist, you have to be asking those questions, and there is going to be pessimism of what is the future of ROH. I think that's what everyone is looking at, and December 11th becomes a very interesting show in how it's handled.